What many people don't realize is that it's not only about the 90 degrees angle which makes Devon's lift insane, but it's about the amount of torque which is higher than others, which Devon experiences while lifting 70 kilos due to his longer forearm than other guys. So these two factors make Devon's lift more impressive than anyone. If Lala team or Alex does the same lift with the same form, then that will be something to be amazed of because both of them have longer forearms than Devon. The most important thing is the angle between the forearm and cable. If it's not 90 degrees, it decreases the amount of force you need to lift the weight. This is supposed to be a pronation lift, not an elbow flexor lift. The key to doing this lift correctly is to kick your wrist back. This intentionally breaks the structure between the hand and forearm and places the load on the pronator muscle. Try this lift and with the same weight, lift with your wrist curled in past neutral. Do it again with the same weight and kick your wrist out past neutral and lift. The difference will feel insane. The placement, and therefore friction of the strap would prevent a lot of rotation. That is why having your wrist bent backward reduces the contact of the strap on your hand and forearm and places a rotational force through the hand, which would target the pronator a lot more. This lift isn't solely a pronation lift for sure. You would have to have some equipment that rotates the weight as you pronate, and have a platform that your arm could rest on that takes the elbow flexor out of the equation. Because what happens is people make their elbow, wrist, and forearm static, then use the calf muscle and hips to lever the weight up where the elbow is the pivot point. It becomes a seesaw fulcrum when that's the opposite of what it should be. You should be leaned back and the lift is a pronation twist with the forearm, and failure results in the hand being forced into supination. There needs to be some movement in the forearm and elbow. Lifting the feet off the ground prevents this from happening. The more the feet and hips move, the worse the lift and the less pronation there is. It's possible to do it where there is almost no pronation and it's simply a static riser, which is what most people do the first few tries, especially if it's not the right strap or the strap is too long. Devon does this lift the least comfortably. He does it at the angle that makes the movement at his weakest angle. At the edge of the pin pad, way harder to do when it has that ugly angle. It's on his arm more than all the other methods. The pressure in an arm wrestling match is never in a perfect, symmetrical, parallel way. That's why perfectly parallel off the floor is not ideal for this lift. When totally parallel, it is mimicking more of a defensive position, like when someone is flop pressing down on the arm angle. For the offensive, Devon describes these lifts as the icebreaker so clearly, it's meant to be offensive. It's better to have a slight upward angle because it's teaching you to start the match in as much of a high ground position as possible. There's a fine line though, because too much forearm angle does put the tension into your forearm bones and doesn't target the muscle and tendons we are trying to get stronger. Both Devon's offensive and defensive pronation have leveled up quite a bit, and he has gained something crazy on his riser recently. Which makes sense since riser is largely related to neurological, not only muscular, adaptation. I think he will be able to attack Levan's fingers far more effectively. In round 1 this time based on his lifts. This weight taxes his overall upper arm to get it off the ground, but the point is whether or not the wrist fails. It's technically possible for there to be a weight that really challenges your upper arm to get the weight off the ground, but your wrist is strong enough to take an even bigger load. If anything like this applies here, then Devon might actually have a lot in reserve before his pronation fail. As we know, Devon did some strict curls a few years ago, and his results were largely unimpressive for his overall size, weight, and level. He only did like 70 to 80 kilos, while people like Irakli are doing noticeably over 100 kilos. So we know that certain upper arm bound movement, are not Devon's forte because he doesn't focus on them. So, it makes sense that he struggles a lot to get it off the ground, but his wrist doesn't budge. Devon is never perfectly parallel, but the camera is also tilted here, which exaggerates how far he is from parallel. He usually has like a 10-degree angle or less, which means that at the worst, he would be still lifting 98.4% of the weight with his elbow flexors. The farther you get from parallel, the quicker it gets worse. At 45 degrees, you get 70%. Arm wrestling is one of the most complicated strength sports. You got true 3D dynamic movement, pulling another human being. There are so many factors playing into it. Not only that in a vacuum, but leverages change. People lose connection at certain angles that others do not. Some need more hand than others, and so on. Many things, even not mechanically, will affect strength, such as CNS training, muscle fiber distribution, etc. This is why on a straight back pressure lift you'd expect someone like Hermes and Dennis to be stronger than Vitally or Devon. On the table, it's a different matter. But the super heavies have roughly the same size joints and tendons with different bone lengths. Devon already knows that guys can lift more than him. The trouble they have is beating him in an arm wrestling match. This isn't powerlifting. With the correct thumb wrap, the pronator should almost always fail before back pressure. This is putting all force through the pronator. One small muscle versus a big chain of muscles. The pronation lift is static. It's way easier than turning your wrist over from a supinated position. Our body is capable of firing multiple muscles at near maximal force output at the same time. There's a reason why we can bench press significantly more than we can do skull crushers. The radius and ulnar bone rotation axis is much smaller than the elbow joint, so it takes less than 1/10 the force to lift the same weights. Also important to note that pronation is assisted by the brachioradialis, Pronator teres, and Pronator quadratus. It's not just one small, tiny muscle. I don't think he needs more than 165 pounds for Levan, but if he gets anything more than that, it would be interesting. I would have to assume he's going all in terms of performance enhancement right now, so it's unpredictable. It absolutely does matter when your opponent has overwhelming side and back pressure. If I recall correctly, Devon never really lost his pronation either in their first match. He just had his arm destroyed. These lifts may be optimal for Devon, and even there I have my doubts. But the average journeyman arm wrestler is missing a lot of secret ingredients, tons of high-level table time, a long history of traditional strength training, an enormous amount of PEDs.